All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am thrilled and delighted to kick off this Fall in Love with Your Life series, month-long series with you today. Once a teacher, always a teacher. I was a classroom teacher for 12 years, and to me, September is the beginning of the year. And it creates all this opportunity and possibilities. And I just remember my students coming into my third grade class, and frankly, their parents too, being like, a new year, right? Everything was possible. Until it started not being possible, except for in my classroom, everything was always possible. But there's that idea of this season of change and transition, and there's so much aliveness to it. And so we are going to dive into all the things today, starting with the Inhabit Path. Dum, dum, dum. And I am so excited to share this with you today because this is something that has emerged for me personally and honestly in the work that I get to do with all of the fabulous and delightful individuals that I get the honor of working with. Over the last, who knows how long, but it's really begun to kind of name itself in the last 6 months or so. And this is the first time that I think I'm sharing it as a path. I've shared it in bits and pieces here and there, and yet there is this power in seeing this as a path, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Those of you that know me know that I tend to be interactive, so I'm going to ask questions. You can add your responses in the chat. There will be times to take yourself off of mute and share. Allow this to be what you need it to be. How's that? On a Thursday afternoon. That seems like I saw somebody post that it's like a Thursday that feels like a Tuesday, right? And then I was off, friends, not just Monday, but also Tuesday for Rosh Hashanah. So I am totally in all the places with the days of the week. So let me ask you to consider this word inhabit. What does it mean to you? I would love for you to just reflect on that for a moment. And then in the chat, share, what does this word inhabit mean to you? What comes up? Taking up space. Live. Living. What else comes up? Thriving in a happy place. I'm inhabiting my chair. Ooh. Jennifer, tell us what that means. What does that mean, you're inhabiting your chair?
I mean, I couldn't think of anything other than I'm sitting in my chair, so.
I love it. Thank you.
Taking up space in my chair.
Taking up space in your chair. Leslie says to live, to exist, living it. Okay. All right. Thank you. Right? And so we start with the meaning that you have. And over the course of today, I'm going to share some stories. I'm going to share some ideas. I'm going to share some thoughts. And you'll see if that definition changes. It might not. Right? Maybe you add to it. Maybe it becomes a little deeper. Maybe it gets tweaked. But just know that this becomes an opportunity. And what's interesting is, by way of introducing myself, I will tell you that it is my greatest joy when I offer something and I offer it one way, but then you make meaning your own way. That to me is in a way to inhabit something, right? When you make something mean something specific and valuable and meaningful to you. And I just thought of that. So there you go. You never know what's going to show up with me. All right, so we're going to continue to dive in with a bit of a story. And this story takes me back a few months. It was actually Mother's Day of this year. And Mother's Day, May 2021, you may have seen that article, I think it was in the New York Times, about this idea of languishing. We weren't quite flourishing yet. There was a lot of meh feeling. And I in mid-May was really feeling a new depth of uncertainty post, pre, during all the things pandemic, and just found myself kind of swirling. Nothing was wrong. My life was pretty good. My work was going pretty well. All the things that I wanted to bring forward were happening. My body, I was feeling strong. A lot of things seemingly were going right. And yet I was feeling untethered. I was feeling scattered. And I was super impatient with my family. Like, really impatient, as my now almost 17-year-old daughter would tell you. And come Mother's Day morning, I had what I'm going to call an epic meltdown. Now, some of you would be surprised by the fact that I can have epic meltdowns because you all think that I'm super calm all the time, which I adore that you think that. However, I would offer you that it's these practices that we're going to talk about today that help me get back to that place. And that place of showing up with ease and peace isn't exclusive to also having the other moments. And on this particular day, I had this feeling bubble up in me, and I kind of just wanted to cry. Has anybody ever had a moment recently, perhaps, where you just kind of felt like you wanted to cry? Right? I see some head nods. Thank you. And sometimes we allow ourselves to do it. But how many of us say, oh, like, just buck up, you'll be fine, right? Or go do a brain dump, one of my favorite tools. Go do this thing, you'll feel better. Or best yet, tomorrow, it's a new day, it'll be better, right? I would offer that those are all survival mode techniques, getting through the day, bulldozing, right? One thing after another. But on this particular day, something was really there, and I chose to listen to it. And so I went down in my unfinished space in my basement, and which is also our gym, and I decided I would cry there because I could cry louder. So that's where I started. I was going to cry louder because I know that the vibrations of my voice help move some things around. And I thought, all right, I can start here. So I told my husband, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. He and the dog were very concerned. Tears. The tears start turning into bigger tears, and I realized, actually, like, I kind of need to feel this in my body. Like, if I'm really going to honor this feeling, I'm going to need to do more than cry, because crying feels very surface level, right? It's like at the very, very tip of all the things. I need to get underneath it. We don't often give ourselves that permission. So I decide to start feeling it in my body, and I look around my space, and I have these big, huge battle ropes. These heavy ropes, and I start shaking them. And by doing that, my cries get bigger and different, and they change tones, and I start feeling different vibrations, and my body starts, if I'm being honest, kind of shaking. And I just keep going until there was a full round of breath. And in that round of breath, I noticed some space. And I paused, and I checked in. What do I need? What matters most right now? And I kind of needed to stay there. I wasn't ready to it felt like if I had stopped, I was just kind of putting a Band-Aid on it. So I stayed there. And I kept going in these rounds of letting myself feel and be, and then check in and notice over and over again until I got to the place where I felt, whew, that moved through me. I share that with you all because it's the beginning of the Inhabit Path. And the reason that's important is because today I want to help you not just withstand your day-to-day stuff, but thrive. Yes, with more peace, more joy, and more purpose, but also with more aliveness, which includes the ups and downs. Why? Right? Why would I want that for you? Well, I've spent a lot of my life in an all or nothing approach, and my hunch is a lot of you have done this too, right? Who's an all or nothinger like me, right? All in for your goals or totally off track, right? All in for your habits or not so much? Feeling good when things are on target, or feeling really bad when you feel like you're off? Yeah? Anybody? I saw some head nods. And in those places, my hunch is that what we're doing is we are pushing ourselves through, right? It's like a hand on your back saying, at all costs, you must keep moving forward. There's a time and a place for that, right? There's a time and place for just keep walking. I just got the Dory Finding Nemo, like just keep swimming. Time and place. But my invitation to you is there is more that's possible. And that, yes, there are turbulence and storms in our lives, and we can feel swept up by them. They do sweep us up. This isn't about ignoring any of that or pretending that we don't feel swept up. But for me, something changed when I realized, without even putting it into formal words yet, that there was another way. That perhaps I could allow my truths to come up and be present, even more than I had, to then own them. And that when I did that, I could then thrive even more. All of that being said, right, that is what shaped my work. It is what continues to shape my relationships and, frankly, my success. And I would offer that this Inhabit Path and this entire story that I've shared with you all started within me. And that start in place wasn't in my brain. In fact, had I stayed in my brain, I would have gotten myself into trouble and probably spiraled down a rabbit hole, right? The invitation that I want to make to you as we set off onto this exploration is that the hard stuff doesn't define you. It doesn't define me. It doesn't define any of us. I've had some hard stuff. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1997, and then I recurred again in 1998. And honestly, back then, I was a silver linings girl, right? And I really, really silver lined my experience. It wasn't that bad. I was never nauseous. I kept working. That was all the first time around. The second time around, when things got harder, and I did have to stop working, and I did get nauseous, I let that define all the things, right? But what I recognized was that the positive thinking wasn't enough. And it's taken a lot of these years to realize that there are these other key ingredients. Positive thinking will get us part of the way, but that there's this opportunity when we give ourselves permission to inhabit our truest selves, that the real power becomes unlocked. A lot of us think that if we sit with the feels, we'll stay there. Does anybody else think that? If you let yourself feel overwhelmed by things, sad by things, you will get stuck there. Yeah. I have some clients who are like, but how does this fit into law of attraction? And I say, well, and I'm not a law of attraction coach. I believe in intentions and putting things out there and all of these things. But you having feelings and experiencing what's right around you doesn't make it so. It's how we then show up for it. And our thriving isn't built on Band-Aids, right? We can't just Band-Aid our mindset or distract ourselves from how we're feeling. So my practices have changed over the years, and it isn't always easy, right? I've definitely learned so much, and I learned so much by the very generous women that I get to work with, both one-on-one and in groups like the Thrive Circle or Thrive Unleashed. But what I know for sure is that my thriving doesn't live outside. It doesn't live in my head, but it lives deep inside my inner fire, that place deep within me. And that's what helps me thrive. And that's what I want to share with you today. So we're going to start with this premise that your thriving is built on how you show up for yourself on the hard days, on the regular days, not just on the days when your life coach is looking. Oh, I saw some smiles, right? Because that's the piece, right? It's really easy to say, oh, things are good when you're doing all the things and people are looking, but it's what we do when nobody's looking, right? For ourselves, even when we feel tired, even when you feel exhausted, even when it would be easier to just push and bulldoze through. What I know without a shadow of a doubt is that you deserve more than that. You deserve to feel wide awake in your life. You deserve to feel peace. You deserve to feel purposeful. And you deserve to feel joy. The question is, okay, but how? This is where we have a path. And this is a path that helps you get from where you are, because it's really important to notice where you are, because where you are is different than where I am and where somebody else is. So we start where you are, and it helps you get from there towards more peace and more joy, one day at a time, frankly, one moment at a time. And it's not a measure, the where you are isn't a measure of where you think you should be. Because that's the other thing that some of us love to do, right? I should be somewhere else. If you are going to subscribe to the Inhabit Path, I'm going to invite you to consider that you get to start where you are. That is your starting point. So, some of you, you're about to hear something that you're like, oh no, she's not really going to go there, is she? I am. But I start almost all of my calls, one-on-one coaching, Thrive Circle, Thrive Unleashed, with one question. I'm waiting for somebody to put it in the chat. No, I won't make you do that. The question is this: what is working? And so I'm going to ask you all right now, in your life, in this moment, what is working? Tell us. You can put it in the chat. What is something that's working? It is not, no, Jennifer, it is not bad. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to why that is. And thank you for being honest. Accepting an unexpected challenge. Ooh, Emily. Speaking up my mind for speaking up for myself and what I need. Yeah. Taking time for myself when I need it. Yes, Christina. Insight. Ooh, la la. I love all the things. What is working? Prioritizing myself. Staying open to new experiences and saying yes to these. Reserving time without my phone to spend with my family. Yeah, okay. So what I love about your answers, right, is how different they are from one another, and the honesty of maybe I have to think about this, because let me be super clear, you are not alone. Because over half of the time, and I haven't actually statistically proved this, like I don't know if it's really over half the time, but it's probably even more than half, the responses that I get from my clients when I ask this question start with what's not working. And they think they're really clever when they do this. It's like a half sentence of what's working, and then they rear off into what's not. And this is what I love about this question and these responses of I don't know or what's not. Because in those what's not working are usually things that are working. But they aren't paying attention to those things because something else has bubbled up or gotten hard. And so that's what our brain is used to focusing on. Jennifer said, my husband and I walk our kids to school every morning. It's become a nice ritual. They enjoy it. We enjoy it. Good family time. I love it. Thank you, Jennifer, for sticking with it. So I hear things from people like, well, I was feeling really good and I was on track and my practices were working, but then things got really busy and I fell off track and I haven't brain dumped in days, right? And now I'm not sure how to get back on track. Or I was feeling connected, right? This happened, this happened, this happened. and I kind of am feeling like I'm back at square one. Or something I've heard a lot recently is, yeah, nothing is working right now. Life is a total storm. And once things get settled, then I can focus on what's working. I just can't even think about that right now. I get it. And these are all examples of when we are in survival mode, right? And what I am starting to call chill out and Netflix, everything will be better mode, right? Because if I just chill out, that's fine. And sometimes, look, that's exactly what we need. But there is another way. Some of you may have seen an email, I think, that I wrote yesterday, but and if you don't know this already, I love my Peloton and I make Peloton references all the time. So I'm not even going to say I'm sorry. But I heard Robin Arzone say, she asked this question, and I love it. And I'm probably going to ask it like every single day. So get ready. The question is this: are you worth more than easy? Are you worth more than easy? I loved this question because thriving sounds like rainbows and unicorns, right? We tell ourselves that we're only thriving when we feel good, when things are smooth, certain. But that's not what your thriving is built on. And that's not what it always looks like. It is built within you, one step at a time. And it is a path that we get to not only keep walking on, but we have to keep choosing it over and over and over again. Because the thriving isn't just what happens on the good days. And it most certainly isn't always easy. So I would love to know so far what questions come up, what thoughts come up, any takeaways. You can drop them in the chat. You can even take yourself off of mute and ask.
I have a question about brain dumps. I'm terrible about reading email, and fortunately I read the one about this one. I know you do them. I just don't know what it is and what you do and like what a brain dump is.
Awesome. Yes. Well, so I have two thoughts for that. We will definitely talk about that. We're going to actually do one together as a community brain dump on Sunday morning at 8:30, and there will be a video that you can follow along. A brain dump, for short answer to that right now, is it is an opportunity to take whatever's in your brain and give it a place to live on a piece of paper. Stream of consciousness, it could be a list, it could be words, it could be sentences, paragraphs, but it's really taking whatever is taking up space in your brain, where your energy is, and giving it another place to live. Okay? But I will send you resources and ideas and all the things for it, and then you can join us Sunday morning. How's that? Thank you, Jennifer, for asking that. Other questions, thoughts? So, we're going to get to the Inhabit Path in a moment, but I want to share another story first. So, last year I got to work with a woman in the Thrive Circle who was successful in her life. From the outside, she had a pretty fabulous life, but on the inside, she felt totally depleted, really, really tired. Like her check engine light was always on, her words. And she had no idea how to respond to the question, what is working? Like all she could tell me is what wasn't working. And then she started with a few practices like the brain dump, right? And then she started, and what she realized in the brain dump was, okay, her thoughts were telling her all these things, but maybe some of that wasn't true. So then she started adding in some breath practices, just short, noticing the ins and outs of her breath in the morning. And then around in the middle of the day, she was adding in some yoga practices that we had shared in the Thrive Circle, just a short, one little pose to really breathe and be in her body. She was doing those. A few weeks went by, and she started noticing, she was starting to feel a little bit different about how she approached her day. She then added in the layer of exploring and naming her core values, which is something I love to do with folks. And she began to ask herself the question, who am I? And the woman that emerged at the end of those 12 weeks was transformed. She still says to me, I have no idea who I was before then, and I don't want to go back there. How do I not get back there? Is her question. And my answer is, you don't not get back there. You keep showing up for who's here today. And her biggest piece of awareness was that her life hadn't necessarily changed per se. The circumstances of her life, there were still things that were hard. But she described what she felt as it was like she turned the light switch on into the on position for the first time in forever, her inner light switch. She started allowing herself to name her priorities, right? To create boundaries, to protect those priorities, and to start dreaming again about what could be possible. And this is what the Inhabit Path helps us do on any given day. So let's talk about this word. Bye, Carla, you're welcome. This word inhabit. You mentioned, a lot of you shared in your early definitions, right? And I looked up the dictionary definition. The dictionary definition is to occupy as a place of settled residence or habitat, to live in, to be present in, to occupy in any manner or form, to dwell. When I think about inhabiting, your thriving, your joy, your aliveness, I think about three things. I think about being rooted, about being curious, and about being alive in your life. About creating space. All right, this is now more than three things. Creating space and being in that space, tending to that space, acting from that space, being connected and aligned. I share that with you because these things create a space of belonging. And one of the things that I think keeps us out of inhabiting our thriving is that we don't give ourselves permission to belong in our lives as they are. We're always trying to fix or change or tell ourselves we should be somewhere that we're not. Yeah? So this becomes the exploration. And it can be exciting and inspirational to think about what's possible. And maybe you're like, ooh, and we can get dreamy and get motivated. But I'm going to invite you to consider that your thriving requires more than just motivation. It requires you to show up, to choose this path. This path is a roadmap. It's a little bit like a locator. This is where I am, and perhaps I can move in one of these directions. It can be a tool for decision making, and it can be a way forward from wherever you are and help you, yes, get rooted, curious, and fully alive in your life so that you can feel more peace, more purpose, and more joy. So, who's ready for the path, for the 5 steps? I'd love to know. Who thinks they have some ideas of what's on these steps? Ho, ho, ho. I know. What do you think is on the path? Take yourself off mute. Tell me what you think is on the path. What would you put on the path?
So I would definitely include, you talked about the yoga and the breath. So for me, that's a huge way of sort of going into my body and feeling rooted. Yeah. I would think that would be one of the things, or maybe many of the things would be involved with that.
Okay. I'm going to try not to make faces. Yeah. What else? Thank you, Leslie. Christina, what else?
Maybe noticing where you are right now and how you're feeling, and kind of, instead of trying to resist that, just accepting it and acknowledging this is where I am.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have ideas, speculations? Emily?
I think it helps to look ahead to something that you know you're going to enjoy and put everything else in your head aside. Just look forward to that.
Yeah.
It seems to help sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily, for sharing. Anyone else? So the reason I wanted your input there is because these are the 5 steps that I think are on the Inhabit Path. But like I said before, right? You create power when you add your lens, when you make it yours. And you will all see some of elements of what some of you, everybody, frankly, just shared in what I'm about to describe, which also I want you to recognize means that none of this is rocket science. And I can say that because my husband is an aerospace engineer by training. So we have a lot of rocket science conversations happening in our house, or not really. But, right, there are things that are rocket science. This is not, which means it's accessible on any given day. You can choose a place on this path every single day in any moment. So let's dive in. The first place, to me, the first step is movement. And movement, and I would kind of go a little bit deeper to say movement that comes from within the body. So one of the things that I think happens is when we are feeling so exhausted, right? Untethered, unsettled, uncertain, our body starts to feel that too. I often like to say that our body is the ultimate compass, right? It knows things long before our brain does. And yet we tend to push our body through things, even workouts, right? We see our body as this like bulldozer to just move through. But I want to share with you something that moved me in a way, and I think was the first time I really recognized, even though I've been reminded over and over again of the power of movement or being in the body in my entire life. But I saw this so in, and I think one person in this room might have even been there with me, perhaps. In January 2020, I was at Rancho La Puerta, which is a destination spa that I get to go to and present, and I got to experience for the first time groove. Some of you have experienced this with me since then because of this moment that I had where at a certain point, and I'm not a dancer, friends. I'm not a great dancer. Now, I love a good office dance party in the middle of the afternoon, but dancing in front of people, no, not something I've ever really thought I was good at. And yet, here we are in this beautiful space with this master teacher who is just a ray of sunshine, and I'm watching men and women of all ages and body types and all the things move around this room in a way that was pure, unadulterated freedom and joy. This was dance meets yoga meets you're skipping around the playground at 5 years old. And there was this opening. And that moment when I saw that experience and then felt it in my body was the moment of transformation when I realized that movement, being in our body, helps us strip away. Well, it helps us do several things. It helps us process, right? It helps the energies move around. So when I told you that Mother's Day story and I was doing the battle ropes, the vibrations of my voice and the movement, I was allowing things to move through me instead of them getting stuck. Right? Groove. It creates this energetic feeling. Right? And we strip away what it is that's holding us back, the heaviness. And we begin to connect with parts of us that maybe we don't always pay attention to. Movement looks like a lot of different things, and there's no one way to move. But I would offer that the movement that I'm talking about for this Inhabit Path is really, it comes from within. It's not necessarily the pre-planned, right? It's really feeling something and being connected to our bodies. One of the things that I have seen over and over again is when clients, often, not all, a lot though, when clients start with me and I invite them into a body scan and I ask them to name sensations in their body. They don't know. They're like, well, I don't feel sensations. I don't feel anything. Because we're not used to seeing our body as a source of information. We're used to judging our body, right? Oh, my hips, my back, my shoulders, my neck, all the things. But we're not used to being with it as a source of information. And so this idea of movement connects us to the idea that our body is a wise source of embodiment, of being in our body. How's that for really fabulous word phrases? But that idea that it can move us. And it is built to unstick ourselves. The body, if you think about nutritionally, right? The entire kind of digestive system. We take food in, we absorb it. I'm sure I'm going to get the steps wrong. We digest it, we eliminate it. The body is made to do that. Movement can help us do that with emotions and thoughts and feelings. And I say this as somebody who, I've already admitted to you, I love my Peloton. I ride the Peloton a lot. But what I recognized back in May is that I wasn't moving my body from that natural, intuitive place. I was doing the same, I was kind of pushing, I was forcing my body into all of these things, when really my body needed to express itself. So number one, movement is, to me, always a starting place on the Inhabit Path. And as we go through the 5 different parts of the path, I'll explain to you kind of how I see them working together, and that it's not linear at all, but that one of the things that I always notice when I start feeling that slightly untethered place, that's my first question is always, how have I been moving lately? How am I allowing myself to move? So movement, step number 1, or number 1. The second. Now, the other thing that I would say about movement, just to go back to some of the things you shared before, is that I would also invite in breath into that. I think it was Leslie who mentioned breath with yoga, right? Breath is movement of our lungs. And so there's just this noticing of allowing things to move both physically and also internally. Number 2, priorities and boundaries. I've already shared with you that a lot of the women that I work with in the beginning of when they start their work with me are unclear about their priorities. Or rather, they think they know what it is they want, but when they're getting really honest with themselves, their priorities kind of look more like shoulds than their true desires. And because of that, they have either non-existent or leaky boundaries to protect those priorities, right? Because they're not their real priorities. And so there is this opportunity to start saying, what is it that matters? Who am I? Who am I not? And that truest version of me, bye Jennifer. Yes, please catch the replay. It will be there. You'll get the email later. What do I need? What do I want? So if you've been hanging out with me on social media recently, you saw that I transformed a part of my closet space. And that might sound like a super spoiled kind of thing to do. I have a really massive closet, I'm not gonna lie. But I recognized that I had a vision when we bought this house to let that part of the closet be a space that was gonna be like my sanctuary, my meditation space for the morning. And then I filled it up with stuff and realized, no, it's not a good space for that. And so my morning practices were here in my office. And friends, I love my office. Everything in this office has been placed intentionally. I love it, I love it, I love it. But when you start your day at 5:30 in the morning in your office, right, and you kind of end the day, even the good tending practices, my boundaries started getting really leaky. Oh, I'll just check this one thing. Oh, I'll do this other one little thing. And so the practices that were going to nurture me, my inner self, were starting to get overshadowed by work stuff. And I love my work, right? So in my brain, it wasn't a big deal. But when I started getting clear about what really, really mattered and who I am, I recognized I wasn't tending to myself in the way that I deserve to be tended to. And so I got clear about that priority and I created a physical boundary. Now my family, who loves to come hang out in my office about this time of day, is no longer allowed to come in and just plop down on the couch. Now they still do. If I'm being honest, it's going to take some time to train them, but we're working on it, right? But there's this idea of getting clear. Who are you? I love starting the day with this question. And I've created challenges around this question every single day for a period of time. Who am I? And that answer is going to be different on any given day, right? But the more you start to notice what makes you you, what matters to you, what doesn't, then you can start to create boundaries. And let me be clear, the boundaries are not just to keep stuff out. Strong boundaries help you keep the good stuff in. They help you create space for what you want to grow. Yeah? So priorities and boundaries, number 2. Number 3. And I think Emily, you were alluding to this. Or I'm going to say you were alluding to this. You can agree or disagree. Hope and pleasure. We tend to live our lives behind a lot of closed doors. The doors of this isn't a good time. The doors of I can't possibly do that. Or my body doesn't do that. I'm not the type of person who. Right? And when we are functioning from that place of feeling depleted all the time, we don't see a lot of hope, right? We tend to see all the reasons we can't do something or be something. But hope and pleasure offer us a different access point. There's a quote I love by Mariam Kaba. She says, hope is a discipline. And what I would offer is that hope and pleasure go hand in hand, because pleasure fills you up and allows you to create space for hope. And when you have hope, you allow yourself to receive pleasure. Right? And the more you fill up, the more it spills over. So this idea of hope and pleasure is one of my favorite explorations to play with people, because when I say pleasure, they're like, pleasure? What do you mean pleasure? Pleasure. And I'm talking all types of pleasure. So whatever you're thinking of that, and, right, the things that touch your heart, the things that stir you, the things that make a part of you smile. Pleasure can be seeing a sloth in a tree, the same exact sloth, not having moved for over 2 days in the same exact tree, right, that I got to see last month in Costa Rica. But pleasure can also be sitting at the table, at the dinner table, and listening to my teenager and my husband and I have a really interesting conversation instead of them bickering. That is pleasure, right? Pleasure can be so many things. But when we tap into pleasure, we start to create space for hope. And when we create space for hope, we allow for more pleasure. So hope and pleasure, number 3. And you see how these are all start to become a little bit interdependent and create ripples onto one another, yeah? Because number 4 is dreaming. And this, I'm retracting what I said before, Emily. I think this is actually maybe what you were referring to, or maybe it's a combination of both, right? But dreaming about what can be possible and allowing yourself to believe that you have everything to gain. Now, I add the caveat to this about dreaming, right? I'm a big visualizer, and I talk about one of the things I know about myself is that I'm this person who has audacious dreams. I set crazy goals. And I, over time, turn those audacious dreams into even more audacious realities. But the only way that I do that is to completely let go of what I think it's actually going to look like, and how long it's going to take. I say that with the other frame of reference being that dreaming is tapping into our imagination. It's about allowing ourselves to be creative, right? There's a lot of different ways to dream, but it goes back to that almost like childlike place of wonder of what could be possible, right? And that is very much taking those walls that I talked about before that keep us out of hope and pleasure and turning those walls into doors. So dreaming, number 4. And number 5, last but not least, is purpose. It's this question, why does any of this matter? Why is this important? Because I would offer. Now, I'm going to backtrack. Sometimes we do things that don't have a purpose because it just feels like pleasure. And that is absolutely fabulous. But when you are on this path and making decisions and using your discernment and showing up for your truest self, the more we can align our actions, our doing, because we're all doers, we love to do, the more we can align that with our why. And I'm not talking like big theoretical life's purpose why. It could be that. But even why does this matter? Years ago, I started talking about this idea of prioritizing your why instead of prioritizing your time. We're really good at prioritizing our time or thinking about prioritizing time. But imagine if you started prioritizing your intention. And the other thing that I'll say about this is, the other thing about purpose is this word intention. When you are practicing, when you are showing up, it's bringing these forward purposefully, intentionally, rather than passively. Right? Doing something because it's going to help you cultivate or tend to or be curious about, as opposed to just happenstance. Right? So it's being purposeful. So these 5 steps on this path, none of them are outlandish. None of them are things you haven't heard before in some way, shape, or form from someone, whether it's me or someone else. They aren't all linear. Every time I draw this path, it zigs and it zags, right? One doesn't always lead to the next. I think they can, right? I think they very naturally go from movement to priorities and boundaries, to hope and pleasure, to dreaming and purpose. But you might notice that on some things, you might connect the dots in a different way, right? Sometimes you might stay in one for a longer period of time. Other times you might follow them in order or in order. One of the things I like about seeing this as a path is that I've noticed that I tend to rely on some of these more than others. And that's the power of seeing this as a big picture, because that's one way that I think we also keep ourselves a bit stuck when we keep doing the same thing over and over again, even if it's good for us, right? So I probably tend to rely on, or have relied on, dreaming, right? I probably have spent the last few years, I had to think about this for a second, I'm thinking about what could be possible. And that's fabulous, except that maybe I wasn't spending enough time, or I had shifted my movement and wasn't being true to the movement that my body really craved. Boundaries. totally didn't focus on for priorities. Yes, boundaries, no. And they go together, right? They need one another. Our priorities need our boundaries, and our boundaries need priorities, right? So this becomes an opportunity to just notice, right? We use Google to self-diagnose ourselves all the time. This becomes a tool for you to say, where am I on this? When you're making a decision, when you want to take a step forward, is there one of these that maybe says, start here? So I would love to know what questions, what thoughts do you have about this? Some of you are not new to any of this work, but maybe this is the first time you've seen it in this context. What thoughts do you have? Hillary, go for it.
So as I was taking my notes, I kind of did it on a path, right? So I drew like a little path and I put 5 little markers and wrote each thing in the path. And as I did that, it kind of what you said at the end there really resonated with me, because I can see 2 stops on the path where I spend almost all my time, and 3 that I rarely ever visit or just kind of like glance at as I walk by on my way to one of my favorites, where I feel comfortable.
Yeah. Right? And so it becomes that reminder, right, friends, our thriving is holistic. It's built on the entire experience of who we are. So, right, we tend to stay in the things we know, in the things that feel easy. And so back to that comment of, are you worth more than easy? Emily says it's hard to block out uncertainties beyond our control. 100%. Right? And Emily, I would offer, perhaps it's not about blocking them out, but it's just deciding that certain things are uncertain. Because here's the interesting thing about that, right? The uncertainty of it isn't the hard part. The hard part is, at least, and you can tell me where I'm wrong, the meaning that we attach to the uncertainty, the what ifness around it, right? And so it's that not knowing that then we create stories or thoughts around that tend to take us down that spiral or into a spiral. Does that land?
I think that, Elena, this also resonates very well when I am calm and I have the time to pause, right, and think. The problem is when I get my triggers and the things that stress me, could be from burning something in the kitchen to a patient dying, right? It could be something minor, something major. But once something triggers you or some comment that someone said at home, how do you go into this flow and finding my purpose and my boundaries? It's how do I use these resources when your brain is firing and seeing all the negativity that it's going around, and pausing, breathing, and you accessing this. I think that is my challenge.
Yeah. So Lily, thank you for that. Yes, 100%. To me, when we get triggered like that, right? When that button gets pushed, and it could be something small or something massive, that's where I always end up back in my body. And movement to me is that first step that helps me process this. And because it's the first thing that I think happens is we that button gets pushed and we put up all of our armor, right? We want it to either not have happened or not to be feeling the way that we do. And so we start to try to push everything out. I would offer that there's actually an opportunity in a safe way. Capital T traumas, no, right? But if you can be with that feeling of discomfort, it's why I love Yin Yoga, because Yin Yoga is not actually about the Zen for me. Yin Yoga is about finding that edge of discomfort and staying there and saying, okay, I can be okay, but I have to allow myself to process this. I have to allow myself to feel this. So maybe it starts with a brain dump, or maybe it starts in the body, whether it's a child's pose, or Lily, you grooved, right? Like allowing yourself to just be with something and move, give it permission to move in you, within you. Does that make sense? Or what thoughts do you have?
So I go and do Zumba, and for me, that's my groove. And then I go boxing and I hit and I kickbox and I'm like, I let it all out, right? But then I come to work, or then something happens at home, and then it's I go back into that tension. So yes, I do the yoga, I do the movement, I do the flow. That hour I am in my zone. I am like, yeah, the world is beautiful, everything is positive. It's it's in the moment of tension. What is the trick to use those resources? Not when you have the hour of dancing, but when
No,
you're
no.
but when you're having a fight with your daughter.
Correct. Yeah. So, but here's the interesting thing, right? I would offer that you can access the, if you think about it, right? And sometimes we don't think about it right away. We have to like go and have the thing and then we come back to it. But I would offer that that's still a win. Even if you come back to it 5 minutes later, 5 hours later, 5 days later, bringing yourself back to, okay, I reacted this way. I didn't want, like, so that's one thing. The other thing that I would say is when that button gets pushed, whether it's your daughter or at the hospital or anywhere, right? It gets pushed because we're sad, because we're feeling something. And so one of my very favorite practices is one by Kristen Neff. It's a self-compassion practice. She's written a book. She's written multiple books, but one on self-compassion. And it's hand over heart. And it's, of course, I feel this way. It's giving yourself permission. I mean, I think really, really the first step, and there are lots of different, I can send you some resources, but Tara Brach, who's a meditation teacher and a therapist, talks about this. We have to recognize how we're feeling, name it, and kind of be with it for a moment, almost befriend it, to say, okay. And right, this doesn't necessarily, we're not trying to turn it into a rainbow or a unicorn. Right, just saying, this is how I feel. I feel pissed off. I feel sad. I feel happy. Like, it could be the full range. Just allowing it to be there for a moment. To not wish it away or try to bottle it up. Because I think when we bottle it up, it gets bigger. And the bad news is we have to keep coming back to it. Right? So to your point of I go and I do the thing and then I go back and then it happens again. Yes. Because that's what life is built on. So the more we practice it, the more we come back, the better we get at catching ourselves. But it's not to say that we're never going to feel that way anymore. Does that make sense or help? Thank you for asking the question. You have at least one other physician in this group who might recognize, right? But yeah, and here's the other thing that I'll say about that, everybody, is that I think part of the Inhabit Path that maybe is somewhere in here or is an assumption about it is that this isn't, that we need to release the expectation of feeling a way other than we feel. Right? We need to let go of the fact that, or of the meaning about it being bad to feel a certain way. Yeah? Other thoughts or questions? I appreciate this group so much. Thoughts, questions, takeaways.
So, Elena, one
Yeah.
just to tag on to that, one of the things that I'm sort of become in the habit of doing, because I used to get triggered and it was so painful, the triggering from a family member or whatever, from whatever was going on. And it would literally stop me in my tracks and stop me from being able to just even move. I felt paralyzed by it. So I learned this technique of observing it as an outsider and just being really curious about it. And I tried it today. I actually got triggered by an email I read today. And I had basically given an opinion about something. Somebody else gave another opinion. And then the person making the decision went with the other person's opinion and not mine. And I immediately felt by this one little, it was a little thing, but I immediately felt triggered. I felt invisible. And I kind of go sometimes to this whole thing about, I grew up feeling invisible. I'm a middle child. I grew up feeling not heard, not understood, not, and I kind of went there immediately. And then I stepped back a little bit from it. And I said, wait a minute, I'm triggered right now. And I was curious about it. And just in that state of curiosity, it sort of diminished. It helped it. I mean, I was staying with it, but it made it possible to get through it. The moment,
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. And that's the piece of, right, bringing awareness to it. The other thing that I would offer, the other question that I like is, what am I making this mean? When you get to the place of curiosity, and that's not initially, right? So it's in that place of like just noticing it, observing it. Absolutely. Right? Eventually saying, what am I making this mean? And then kind of just playing with it, right? Like you did, Leslie. Thank you for sharing that. Christina, yes, you can come back to it another time. The key is to not, or the important piece is to not just bottle it up, because it's going to come back. It will come back, right? And come back stronger. Probably when we get pushed, when another button gets pushed. And then that other button gets pushed that has nothing to do with the first button, then, you respond to the people you love the most and you're like, wah! And they're like, what just happened? So this point, though, of being rooted, I'm so glad that this came up, because this is where we're heading next week, right? So we have 2 opportunities to get together next week. On Sunday at 8:30 in the morning Eastern, it's this same Zoom room, same link, will be a community brain dump. You'll want a piece of paper and a writing implement. We'll brain dump together. We'll talk about what a brain dump is for those of you that haven't brain dumped before. We'll brain dump and then we'll debrief a little bit. And then on Tuesday, we are going to talk about 3 ways to get rooted, to really help you find the practices that you can start to play with to give yourself permission to be centered and come back to resetting and reorienting yourself in all the moments, right? In all the different types of moments. So what I want to offer you today is this reminder that you can explore this path. This is yours to play with. And I would love to hear about what happens when you do. What do you notice? What works for you around it? What questions come up? What do you notice you automatically gravitate towards? And what are you like, ooh, that one, no, not so much for me? Because that resistance is good information for you to play with, to notice, and to create some space around. If you decide as you're playing with it that you would like a little bit more structure and guidance around it, I know that this work is magnified and made even more powerful and sustainable when it's done with guidance, and especially in a group setting. And the Thrive Circle is coming up starting in October. And if that's something you're interested in, I would be delighted to talk to you about. We have several former Thrive Circlers here. And what I know for sure is that this 10-week exploration takes you through this Inhabit Path and helps you make it yours. So if you have questions about that, reach out, let me know. But most importantly for today, what I want you to know is that this Inhabit Path is here for you no matter where you are. And it gives you a place to start. And I would invite you to give yourself permission to play with it, to be on the path. You're so welcome, Emily. You're so welcome. But notice what's there for you. Where is your starting point? Where would you choose to start? And if you're not sure, start with movement. right? That to me, being in your body is always the right place to start if you're not sure. So I'm happy to linger if you have questions or thoughts. I would love to see you Sunday morning. And then again, Tuesday, you don't have to sign up again. The link is the same. You'll get reminder emails. If you don't want to get any more reminder emails, just hit reply and tell me, and I'll take you off this list so that you don't keep getting them. But I would love to see you again. Any questions or thoughts? Thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop the recording, but then I will stay for questions or thoughts. So let's